I'm going to marry your sister. ATM is no longer needed. I could hear laughter on the other end of the phone. Yet, I didn't express any surprise. I thought that if I fell into their trap, it would weaken my position. And now, I didn't feel even a trace of love for Daniel. Okay. Get ready for this. I replied nonchalantly, but inside, I was burning with rage. Daniel had been enjoying an affair with Mandy, dumping all the childcare, elder care, and housework on me. I couldn't forgive Mandy, who had borrowed money from me and in the end, called me an ATM after having an affair. You're okay with us getting divorced, right? When Daniel pressed me like that, I nodded and said, yes. On the other side of the phone, I could hear the two of them rejoicing. They won't be laughing for long. There's no way they won't receive divine punishment after demeaning me like this. I was biting my lips tightly. My name is Hillary Fisher. I'm 60 years old, living with my husband Daniel, who is 5 years older than me. Our son, Ben, is 30 years old this year and has already moved out. Until recently, I was working part-time at a supermarket. But due to the recent rise in prices, I was forced to retire early due to personnel cost reductions. I had worked there for many years, and the manager, who was very kind to me, even gave me a severance package, despite being part-time. It was a bit disappointing to retire before reaching the official retirement age. But working at the supermarket definitely helped me grow. I'm very grateful to the manager who kept employing me. You might think I'm about to enjoy a slow life in my old age, but actually, I'm currently facing some problems at home. Or rather, with my husband. I'm very anxious about whether we can continue living together for many more years in this cold marital relationship. I want to explain everything in order. I met my husband Daniel about 40 years ago. At that time, I was a student looking for a job. And I went around talking to various working adults from different industries. The seniors I talked to were mainly from the newspaper club I was part of. The alumni often showed up at our club drinking parties, and Daniel was one of them. Hillary, what kind of company do you want to work for? Daniel, who was rumored to be the handsome senior in the club, asked me this with an appropriate distance. I honestly told him that I wanted to work for a stable company. Then how about my bank? Being a banker is the most stable job, right? Indeed, it seems like a solid job. I responded with a typical comment, but I was happy that Daniel invited me to apply to his bank. Encouraged by him, I applied and successfully got the job. It wasn't too difficult to get an offer since my university had many students hired by that bank. Once I started working at the bank, I saw how popular Daniel was. He was always being invited out for drinks after work. And it seemed impossible for me to get close to him. However, Daniel often asked me out, and despite feeling guilty towards his other fans, I started going out to eat with him more and more since I was interested in him. This led to us dating, and 3 years later, we got married, and I quit the bank. I regret quitting my job after only about 4 years, but back then, most women quit their jobs when they got married. Especially since Daniel and I worked at the same place. It seemed better to him if I worked part-time elsewhere. I had no regrets about marrying Daniel, though. For a while, we enjoyed our life together, but around the time I turned 30, I got pregnant with our eldest son, Ben, and gave birth. Until then, Daniel had treated me like a princess, but as soon as the child was born, he started acting coldly. Can you make milk for Ben? Milk? That's a mother's job. Why do I have to do it? I was filled with shock rather than sadness or anger at his 180-degree change in attitude. I had heard that men can lose interest when their wives give birth. But I thought that was only true for a limited number of couples. I never imagined that Daniel, who had loved me so much, would suddenly throw me into the sea after I had our child. The days that followed were tumultuous. Daniel literally did not help with childcare at all. Childcare is a mother's job. Besides, you're a full-time housewife, so it's natural for you to take care of it. I'm busy with work. Although Daniel came up with plausible reasons, I couldn't accept them. Even so, it's hard for me alone, as it's my first time taking care of a child. As I said this, watching Daniel's reaction, he glared sharply at me. If it's that hard, why don't you go to my parents' house? My dad's free, he can take care of it. Your father?
Yeah.
That's right. I couldn't hide my surprise at Daniel's suggestion. His mother had passed away early, and his father, who was the only one left, had recently injured his leg and might soon need care. I couldn't believe he was suggesting that his father, in that condition, should take care of our child. However, Daniel made no effort to be involved in childcare at all, merely passing the responsibility to his parents. I was at my wit's end with Daniel's absurd ideas. Since then, I received almost no help with childcare from Daniel, and I was left to raise Ben on my own, consulting childcare books. Fortunately, Ben was a well-behaved and honest child who listened to me and grew up straight and true. When Ben turned 5, after sending him off to kindergarten, I noticed a missed call on my phone. Hello, Hillary? It seems my father has collapsed. I'm thinking of putting him in a facility, so could you handle the paperwork? What, collapsed? Is he all right? And a facility? I was shocked and my heart raced at the news from Daniel. My father-in-law collapsing was no small matter. I wondered if he had been taken to the hospital properly. Given my father-in-law's bad leg, it must have been a serious situation. He always treated me like his own daughter, and I would regularly take Ben to see him without Daniel having to ask. It takes about 40 minutes by car from our home to my in-laws. Each time we visited, my father-in-law would greet us with a gentle smile and thank us for coming such a long way. Ben and I both loved my father-in-law and, despite the distance, we were always willing to visit him. Hearing that he had collapsed filled me with anxiety. But Daniel only conveyed the practical matter of putting him in a facility, which irritated me. It's fine, it's fine. I'm heading out for some visits now. Take care of it, will you? Wait a minute. Daniel quickly ended the call after saying only what he wanted to. The idea of putting my father-in-law in a facility was unthinkable to me. Unless it was his own wish, it seemed that Daniel was considering it on his own accord. After much thought, I decided that once my father-in-law's condition improved, I would take care of him myself. When I visited the hospital where my father-in-law was sent, he had already regained consciousness in his room. He had turned 70, but he was struggling to continue the family business of farming. Daniel and I had both been asking him to rest due to his bad leg, but it seemed he had gone out to the field even on that day. Hillary, I'm sorry for causing you trouble. No, it's fine. Please, don't overdo it anymore. My father-in-law, duly chastened by this incident, stopped going out to the field after being discharged. His field was no longer a place for growing crops, just empty land. It could be used again with some care, but since the land would likely be passed on to Daniel, his only son, I didn't think Daniel would take up farming. Feeling sorry for the abandoned field, I decided it was for the best if it meant my father-in-law wouldn't harm himself further. Thereafter, I started taking care of my father-in-law, visiting my in-laws about 3 times a week. Around this time, I also began working part-time at a supermarket. So I had to juggle part-time work, childcare, elder care, and household chores. For childcare, I had switched Ben from kindergarten to daycare, where he could stay longer, allowing me some flexibility. I worked part-time 4 times a week, from morning until just after noon. and then I'd head to my in-laws' house after work. I would pick up Ben from daycare before returning home to cook dinner. It was a tough routine at first due to my inexperience. Although it got somewhat easier with time, I was gradually accumulating fatigue without realizing it. I no longer had the energy to converse with Daniel, and every day I was fully occupied with the immediate tasks at hand. 10 years passed in this way, and I turned 45, while Daniel turned 50. By then, Ben had grown into a mature middle schooler, occasionally showing defiance. But I saw this as a sign of his striving for independence. And while it made me feel lonely, I was happy about his growth. However, Ben never defied Daniel, nor did he even talk to him. Since Daniel had abandoned all childcare responsibilities to me from the start, Ben didn't seem to regard Daniel as a father. It was around this time that our already strained marital and familial relationships entered a crisis. It all started when I received a phone call from my sister Mandy. "Hello, Hillary? I went to Hawaii with some friends recently and wanted to give you a souvenir. Can I come over?" Mandy, my older sister by 3 years, has always been extravagant with money and had a fiery temperament, making us quite incompatible. She always wore heavy makeup and, unlike me, was very beautiful. Her offer to bring a souvenir from Hawaii seemed suspicious, but I couldn't dismiss her goodwill and agreed. Mandy came over on the weekend and gave me the souvenir, which I realized was not from Hawaii but rather something that seemed to be sold in the States. Thinking that pointing it out would surely upset her, I remained silent. "Hey, Hillary. I'm in a bit of a pinch this month. Can you lend me some money?" So, this was her plan all along. Lend you money? Why? I suspected it was just her usual overspending. "You see, I've been feeling unwell lately. The doctor said I might need to be hospitalized. But I don't have insurance, and I can't afford the hospital and treatment costs." As she said this with slumped shoulders, I couldn't find the words to reply. I wondered what illness required her to be hospitalized. I stared at Mandy in silence for a while, but she looked at me with pleading eyes. "All right. Just make sure you pay it back after you're treated. Thank you." Sisters are the best. Mandy suddenly brightened up, grabbed my hand, and shook it vigorously. Even though we didn't get along, she was my sister, and I wanted her to get well soon if she was sick. By the way, when is Daniel coming back? After learning I would lend her the money, Mandy asked this as if it were an afterthought. "He just went to the deli. So, I'll just say hello and then I'll be going." Just then, the sound of the front door opening signaled Daniel's return. "Hello, Daniel." "Oh, Mandy. You're here." "Yes, I just had something to discuss with Hillary. I'm done now, so I'll be leaving." As Mandy stood up and passed by Daniel, it looked like she whispered something in his ear. After Mandy left, I asked, "What did Mandy say to you just now?" But he evasively replied, "I don't know. It wasn't anything important." Although I was curious, by the next day I had completely forgotten about it. It was a month later when Daniel and Mandy's affair came to light. I had planned to visit my father-in-law that day, but because my part-time work hours were extended, I decided to visit my in-laws the next day and went home as usual. Ben was at his tutoring classes, and only Daniel was supposed to be at home. Why are there women's shoes here? The moment I took off my shoes at the entrance, I was horrified to see a familiar pair of shoes. They were the heels Mandy had worn over the weekend. Swallowing hard, I entered the house to find the living room empty, which briefly relieved me. But then, I heard Daniel and Mandy's indiscreet voices coming faintly from the bedroom. And I was shocked. "What are you doing?" I considered storming into the bedroom right then, but at the last moment, I hesitated. What if exposing their affair now led to a divorce? Ben wouldn't want to go with Daniel. But if he came with me, I wasn't confident I could afford his tuition on my own. Even if I divorced, I wanted to wait at least until Ben had graduated from college. Regretfully, I decided to leave the house and pretend I hadn't seen anything. Instead, I gathered evidence of the affair, taking photos of the traces left behind, and secretly checking Daniel's phone to save his exchanges with Mandy. It appeared they had been having an affair for about 6 months. While I felt boiling anger, I repeatedly told myself it was for Ben's sake and endured the days without exposing their affair. 15 years passed, and Ben had become a respectable working adult. He had quit his job soon after joining and started his own business, now working hard as its CEO. I had retired from the supermarket as usual, but was working a little at Ben's company. I had been giving Mandy occasional treatment fees, but as her demands became persistent, I grew tired of lending her money and started ignoring her calls. In fact, the signs of Daniel and Mandy's affair had disappeared about a year after it was discovered. Daniel probably got bored of Mandy. He changed his mind and chose to stay married to me. Knowing this, I no longer felt the urge to confront them about the affair, and decided to turn a blind eye to Daniel and Mandy's relationship. However, I realized my naivety after hearing about my father-in-law's death. I learned about my father-in-law's passing through a phone call from Daniel during the day. He had passed away peacefully at 95, but I was deeply shocked, having cared for him for many years. Unlike Daniel, my father-in-law was kind and considerate, and I mourned as if I had lost my own parent. Yet even at such a time, Daniel said, laughing, "Dad seems to have saved up quite a fortune, so it's something to look forward to." I was so angry that I thought of giving Daniel a piece of my mind. But then I noticed a woman's laughter coming from beside him. "Oh, have we been found out?" Hearing Mandy's unmistakable voice, I felt a chill down my spine. So Daniel and Mandy's relationship hadn't ended. They had been secretly continuing their affair for the last 15 years, right under my nose. Knowing this, the two of them seemed like enigmatic beings to me. "I'm going to marry your sister. The ATM is no longer needed." I could hear their mocking laughter on the phone. Yet, I didn't express any surprise. I thought that if I fell into their trap, it would weaken my position. And by now, I didn't have a shred of love left for Daniel. "Okay. Get ready for this," I replied nonchalantly, but inside, I was burning with rage. Daniel had been enjoying an affair with Mandy, dumping all the childcare, elder care, and housework on me. Mandy, who had borrowed money from me and in the end called me an ATM after having an affair, was unforgivable. "You're okay with us getting divorced, right?" When Daniel pressed me like that, I nodded and said, "Yes." On the other side of the phone, I could hear the two of them rejoicing. They won't be laughing for long. There's no way they won't receive divine punishment after demeaning me like this. I was biting my lips tightly. After my father-in-law's funeral, I submitted the divorce papers as promised. When I informed Daniel, he feigned happiness. "Now that we're divorced, you should move out of the house quickly." "Move out, me?" I asked in surprise, and Daniel nodded, "Of course. I'll be living with Mandy now. You're on your own. This house is too big for one person." Frustrated beyond anger, I simply replied, "Okay," without the will to argue, and complied with Daniel's demands. Although I was furious, I had already considered my living situation before the divorce. I left the house and headed to Ben's place, having informed him in advance. He welcomed his mother, who had split from Daniel and moved in. He was truly a kind son. I vowed to work even harder at Ben's company than before. A few days later, I received a call from a man claiming to be a lawyer. When I met him at the designated location, Daniel, Mandy, and the lawyer were seated. I am in possession of a will from Mr. Daniel's father. The lawyer said this and took out the will written by my father-in-law from his bag. I was surprised, not knowing my father-in-law had left a will. As Daniel's only child, he was the sole legal heir to my father-in-law's estate. No longer being Daniel's wife, I had no expectation of receiving any inheritance. Wondering why I had been called, I listened as the lawyer began to read the will. The contents were astonishing. Surprisingly, my father-in-law had left a will bequeathing half of his estate to me. This meant that the field he owned became part of my assets. While there is a reserved portion of inheritance, meaning that Daniel would also inherit half. It was a bolt from the blue for him, who expected to inherit everything. Why does Hillary inherit half? I'm the only son, I should receive it all. Your father was very grateful to Hillary, who devotedly cared for him despite having no blood relation. He considered it a way to express his gratitude. Father. I felt deeply moved by my father-in-law's thoughtfulness. What's that? I thought we could have an easy life with the inheritance. Mandy twisted her face in frustration. The lawyer then revealed that my father-in-law had also left in his will that all his debts should be inherited by Daniel. But it seemed that the distraught Daniel and Mandy hardly heard this. Tears began to flow from my eyes as I was filled with gratitude towards my father-in-law. Thank you, Father. Seeing me cry, the two of them seemed to grow even angrier. But the lawyer sternly concluded, that is the content of the will. I'm not happy about losing half, but at least we still have the other half, thanks to the law. Daniel said this and patted Mandy on the shoulder, who then nodded, seemingly relieved, right. Well, this is
Goodbye.
then. We won't be dealing with you again, have a nice life. As the two of them left with loud laughter, I returned to Ben's house, cherishing my father-in-law's last act of kindness. 2 months had passed since I received the inheritance. Anne was working at Ben's without any issues when I received a call from Daniel one Sunday. Ben and I were enjoying a day off at home when my mobile phone rang loudly. Daniel. The atmosphere froze between Ben and me when we realized it was Daniel calling. Why is he calling? After he abandoned us, what does he want now? You don't have to answer. Despite Ben's advice, the persistent calls continued, so I answered the phone to silence Daniel. What's the matter, calling so many times? Didn't you say you'd never deal with me again? I spoke in an annoyed tone, but Daniel ignored my words and began speaking frantically. Hey, what's going on? Why are you working at Ben's company? And why is Ben's company on TV? They even showed his house. How does he live in such a grand place? His voice was frenzied, and even Ben frowned next to me. Oh, you saw the TV then? I realized why Daniel had suddenly called. Recently, a TV station had covered the sports gym that Ben managed, airing it yesterday. Ben's gym, a unique concept combining a gym and a cafe, had caught the TV station's interest. Since opening, membership had skyrocketed, and Ben had appeared on TV, successfully introducing his large home as Daniel mentioned. I was living in Ben's so-called mansion, a spacious house standing out among its neighbors. That's why Daniel, having seen Ben's house on TV, was so shocked. How come you guys live in such a big house? Over here, Mandy has spent all of my father's inheritance. And I'm left with his debts. Damn, I didn't hear anything about these debts from the lawyer. Daniel ranted bitterly. But the lawyer had indeed informed him about inheriting the debts. It wasn't my fault he hadn't paid attention. Well, that's not my concern. You were informed by the lawyer, and it's your responsibility for not checking. You knew about Mandy's spending habits since before your marriage. I even gave her money for treatment, and she hasn't paid me back. Now I understand. Both you and Mandy are the worst kind of people. Quick to betray someone you should trust. Grr. He was speechless at my valid point. Besides, you started all this by cheating, didn't you? Why should I be blamed for anything? After venting my frustration, I felt somewhat relieved. Realizing his accusations were futile, Daniel suddenly pleaded. Please, Hillary, lend me some money. I was supposed to retire this year and get my retirement pay. But I was fired, and all I'm left with is my father's debt. Mandy and I fought over money, and she left. How am I supposed to live now? You're the only one I can rely on. I was wrong about everything. I apologize. Please, could you spare me some of my father's inheritance? You're living a good life with Ben, right? Think of it as helping someone out, okay? To think he'd stoop so low as to beg for money from an ex-wife he cheated on was beyond understanding. Ben, having overheard the conversation, looked at me as if he had something to say. I handed him the phone, and he turned on the speaker and addressed Daniel. Dad, you betrayed Mom and married my aunt, right? Since I was born, I heard you never took care of me. I don't have any memories of playing with you. It was always just me and Mom. She was the only one who came to my school events and sports days. That's why she's the only parent I acknowledge. And why she's living with me and helping with my company. Why should I lend money to a father who's never done anything for me? I won't give you a single penny. Ben spoke firmly, like a true businessman. I was overwhelmed by emotion. On the other end, Daniel gasped. Ben, how can you say that to your father? Fine, I won't rely on you two ever again. Don't underestimate me. With that, Daniel ended the call. Ben and I stared at the silent phone, then burst into laughter at the absurdity of the situation. Can you believe him? Begging for money and then saying he wants nothing to do with us. How ridiculous.
Yeah.
Dad always loses his head when he gets angry and never thinks things through. As we were talking about Daniel's foolishness, the phone rang again. It was Daniel. Despite saying he wouldn't involve himself with us, he probably wanted to beg for money again. Annoyed, I blocked Daniel's contact. That's it. Now that fool truly can't involve himself with us anymore.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mom. Thank you. I sensed not just gratitude for today, but for raising him almost single-handedly all these years. I'm the one who should be thankful. You've provided such a good life for us. No matter how old you get, you're still my precious son. We affirmed our bond as mother and son, grateful for each other's presence in our spacious home. A few days later, I received a call from my sister, Mandy. Her message was almost identical to what Daniel had said. I couldn't imagine lending more money to Mandy, who hadn't even repaid what she owed. In fact, I hadn't yet demanded compensation for her affair with Daniel. So I used this opportunity to successfully sue both of them for damages through a lawyer. As a result, they were even more burdened with debt and, perhaps as expected, ended up divorcing. Their marriage had lasted only 2 months. Daniel's situation turned out to be even more miserable. He had inherited substantial debts from my father-in-law. Apparently, my father-in-law had borrowed a lot of money to keep his farm running. Struggling alone with the finances, something I hadn't known. While I was caring for him, he often complained about Daniel, who had not only refused to take over the farm but also neglected Ben and never visited home. He was furious with Daniel's attitude toward me, and I always tried to calm him down. Considering how angry my kind father-in-law was, Daniel must have been a terribly irresponsible son. The only solace Daniel had, his retirement pay, vanished when he was dismissed for disciplinary reasons. Rumor has it that he tried to embezzle money from the bank he worked at to pay off his debts. If he had worked quietly until the end, he would have received his retirement pay. But blinded by immediate greed, Daniel's foolishness knew no bounds. Now, at 65, he's working multiple part-time jobs to pay off his debts. Starting new work at this age, especially for someone who's never done household chores, childcare, or elder care, must be a huge blow to his pride. Considering how he neglected his son's upbringing and continued an affair with Mandy for years, I think it's a fitting punishment. He should keep striving until the end. As for me, I'm still working energetically at Ben's company. The staff, who are as old as my children, treat me very kindly. It's a workplace where smiles never cease, and that's why customers keep coming. Ben recently got engaged to a girl a year younger than him and introduced her to me. She's a wonderful, sensible lady, well respected by everyone at work. I had planned to move out once they married, but she insisted that we live together. Grateful for her kindness, I'm looking forward to our life together as a family of 3.